are live, and we are here with myself, Nicholas Clay. I coach mindfulness, and I had the honor and privilege to meet who we have here today is Curtis Brooks. And when I met Curtis, I heard his story, which was featured on A&E, about an unfortunate incident where he was involved in a felony murder. And Curtis, you were originally sentenced for life, and you've been out now for 2 years. And so even though you had your special on A&E, we know how TV is. A lot of times you don't really get to talk and really get to flesh out that story on how maybe you would want to share it. And so here we are today, giving Curtis the opportunity to share in depth really what his story is all about and what he would like people to know. And so, Curtis, if you'd like to start at the beginning, the show is yours.
I'd just like to say thank you for the opportunity to speak. You hit it right on the head. A lot of times with TV, you're dealing with production. The things that people saw on the episode was very small snippets of all of the recording that we did in multiple interviews, multiple locations. There were interviews that I did going back to court in the county jail that never made it in. So it's, it's TV. So they have their focus. They're looking to get as good an episode as they can to draw in views. But there is more to the story. And I don't know if you just want me to start from like the beginning or focus on particular things.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's take into account that maybe people aren't aware, haven't seen the special, or they may not watch the special first. So let's give an overview of what is your story and how did it come to be? What got us here today?
Well, what got me to this point is when I was 14, my mother wound up going to Colorado for a drug rehab program. She had been addicted to crack my entire life from the beginning of time that I could remember. And after she graduated that program, I was sent out to live with her. That was right before I turned 15. Just a couple months, I'd say a few months after I turned 15, I wound up homeless. It was just not a good situation between her and I. And she kind of got put in a position to choose between me and her boyfriend at the time. And she chose her boyfriend, which is something that she's apologized to me for after. But the night of the incident, I was homeless at the time. It was a blizzard in Colorado. I was at a mall and happened to run across some guys. Two of them I didn't know. One I had met before. And I expressed to them that I didn't have anywhere to go, was offered a place to stay. The only catch in that was that I was told that I had to go along with stealing a car. I wasn't an angel child. It wasn't the first time I had, gone along with friends to steal a car and do joyride or whatever you want to call it. But in the process of stealing this car, one of the other kids pulled out a gun and shot and killed the owner of the car. And by the law, which is felony murder, if you're in the commission of a crime, a felony, and somebody dies, doesn't matter how they died, you're just as guilty of them dying as if you had shot them or stabbed them or whatever yourself. So I became a person that was labeled as a murderer and sent to prison for the rest of my life.
Yeah, so let's do a recap here because, watching that interview, a couple things stuck out as far as how the narrative was done. And I want people to really understand the situation you were in as a 15-year-old boy. You were with your mother, who chose her boyfriend over her son. You're 15 years old. So if we take a pause to think how young 15 really is, even though at 15 we may think we're grown. So you're 15 years old and you're homeless. You're at a state where you're essentially in survival. Right? You don't have the basic necessities. You don't have shelter. And you run into these kids that offer a way to provide at least what you could use for the night. And essentially when we're in that state, we're looking day by day, right? How to get by to the next day. And then, as you admitted, and I appreciate that, you said it wasn't your first time. You were familiar with that. However, would you say that there was any thought that you were going to kill the individual, or would you say there was any desire in these circumstances, both past and this in particular one, where you would have any desire to want to inflict that kind of harm on another person?
For me, absolutely not.
Right.
I don't use the age kind of like the shield to hide behind. I own responsibility for the fact that put in a situation, I didn't make the right choices. I consider myself weak, not from a standpoint of, equating it to fear or anything like that, but that I wasn't a person that was strong enough to make the right decision, to be put in a position to recognize that, hey, I'm here with kids and they have guns, which isn't a position that I want to be in. I didn't have the strength to say, I'm going to remove myself from this situation. It was, I'll just go along with stealing a car. We'll take the car, get where we need to go, ditch it. The guy will get his car back. No big deal. That's the basic thought frame that I was dealing with at that time, not to cause harm to anybody in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, and you said something that I also realized when I went and watched the special that I appreciate so much about you, is that you don't hide behind any kind of defenses. Like, for example, age. You say, I don't hide behind age, even though the reality is at 15, we are not fully developmentally, especially as most people know for males. We go a little longer into our development, and much of life experience wasn't had yet. Another thing I noticed that you also did not hide behind when I first met you, Curtis, and you mentioned your special and the overview of the story, that was the gist of it, and you had directed me to the special that was on YouTube, and I went to watch it. And I noticed something to my preview that was quite obvious. And what I noticed was there was two colored individuals involved, yourself being one of them, we'll say, or African American or whatever, term can be appropriate. And then there was two kids of Caucasian descent, we'll say, of a fairer skin. And you didn't mention that to me. I found that interesting. So I watched this trial. And then I noticed that one of the things you mentioned is there was no plea deal. And yet when I watched this special, two of the kids received plea deals. And they happened to be the two kids of a fairer skin, right? And then the two kids that had a darker complexion, one being the one that pulled the trigger, and the other kid being a 15-year-old who was homeless, looking to get a car so he can have a place to stay, was also sent to jail. I found that very interesting. And what I found commendable is that you didn't bring that up to me. You didn't make it a race thing. And when I mentioned to you the first time, you even said that at the time you didn't make it a race thing and didn't want to make it a race thing. And I found that very admirable. Is there anything more you'd like to share about that, or just as yourself as an individual? Because something that I would really like people to know is Curtis does not hide behind defenses. He really does own and take responsibility for himself, regardless of the circumstances, even if there's obvious bias against him.
All I would add is that just to let people know, I don't try to take a foolish stance. Does racism, exist? Does it affect certain scenarios and everything else? Absolutely, it does. To many people, every single day, whether they're black, white, whatever they might be, people deal with the biases and everything else. My focus on not making it a race thing or pointing out the racial disparity or pointing out whatever it might be, because the county that I was sentenced in has, a bit of a reputation for following that line. It's just that you see so many times that people will trump the race card, and then that race card trumps the cause. And it becomes about the agenda of the racial aspect of it and pushing the racial aspect of it, when really the root cause is what should be focused on. And in my case, the root cause is me. It's not about the district attorney. It's not about the people that decided to offer plea deals to these other guys or offer plea deals to one because, in their words, he was too small to convict. My focus is me. I look back on that time and say, where I went wrong. What could I have done better? I spent time when I first went into prison blaming everybody else. I was mad at the world. I thought the courts had screwed me to give me a life sentence and all of this other stuff. And it took me time to sit down and reflect and realize the only person that was responsible for where I was me. If I had made different decisions, put myself in better positions, I would have never been there. It's possible that if I had made the right decisions, Christopher Ramos wouldn't have wound up shot that night. That's a
Yeah.
burden that I carry with me and a responsibility that I care. So I'm not going to throw a race card out there to cover up the real underlying factors. And that's me.
Yeah, and it's amazing you said that. As someone who coaches mindfulness, getting to the root cause is exactly what I do, and it's getting past the stories that people use as a deflection to find out what's really there. And just it's amazing on the stand you take for yourself, because that was one of the, if you haven't, anyone hasn't watched the special, that was one of the reasons. That's when I knew, and gave you a lot of credit, Curtis, because that was the legit reason. He was too, or at least what was aired on TV. And as you confirmed, he was too small to be sentenced. Yet Curtis, from my understanding, who had no criminal record at the time, was perfectly fine to be sentenced to have his life spent in jail at 15 years old. And I think, correct me if I'm off here, the official sentence is when you were at 17. So you're now a 17-year-old young man who is now going to be incarcerated for the rest of your life for a murder that you did not pull the trigger to and had no intention of committing. And I'll ask you this. Was there any conversation or notion whatsoever before the event happened that there was going to be a murder?
No, there was no intent to kill anyone. There was never a discussion to say, we're going to come up on somebody that has a car and just, shoot and kill them and take their car. No, the extent to which I was committed was literally, we're going to steal a car. That was it.
So here you are in a situation where for most people would agree that there is obvious racial bias. You're in a circumstance that puts you in a more desperate situation. And there's a lot of things that you could have blamed. And as you said, you did at first, and came to terms to be able to take that responsibility for yourself, where some people never come to terms for that. So let's talk a little bit more about when you first got into jail. Like, there must have been so many things going through your mind. What were you going through when here you are now facing life in prison for a trigger that you didn't pull?
I mean, obvious inner turmoil hitting prison. Well, I shouldn't say prison, because I went to the intake where they decide what level facility you go to. So you get there and you're there as a 17-year-old scrawny kid that wasn't breaking 150 pounds, even though I was over 6 foot at that time. You're in with grown adults, massive men who are in there for various causes with various intentions. And you have many people who have their own agendas. Some people, don't like to see the younger guys come in and be taken advantage of, and they'll try to school you and get in your ear and tell you things to look out for and things not to do, things to do. I was fortunate to have a few people kind of pull me to the side. I had the negative people also trying to draw me to their side. But I absolutely was benefited, I think, by having people who were able to get in my ear and help me not make the mistakes while trying to adapt from this 15, 17-year-old kid who was used to being out and doing whatever, because I didn't really have restriction. I didn't have to check with my mother if I went somewhere, I just went and did what I wanted. To now this forced regulation, dangerous situation. And there was definitely a lot of fear involved with that as well.
Yeah. And so how long was it while you were locked up where people then started to come to your aid? Because the whole story on how you got out was your story getting out. And there was those that stepped up on your behalf to get us where we are today. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about how that started and when you first got notified that, hey, there's a possibility here that I'm going to get out and there's people out there fighting for me.
Um, I'll apologize if my dates aren't exactly correct. But the real turning points was, I believe it's the Miller case that the United States Supreme Court ruled on, in which they stated that sentencing a juvenile to life without parole is cruel and unusual punishment. Believe that was 2013, but it might have been 2011. And at that point, when they made that decision in Colorado, they assigned everyone lawyers, because now we have this new law that's gone into effect, or new uh, change to the law. So now we were going to have to all file. So I was assigned a lawyer. And that very first day, when my lawyer came and visited me and told me, hey, this is why I'm here, this is what's going on, and this is what we're going to be filing, was really the first like true efforts, true move in that direction that I might be going home. Um, but that was really the preliminary. It was this lawyer who got in contact with my previous lawyer from a standpoint of saying, hey, we want to look at possibly filing what they call a 35C. It's an ineffective assistance of counsel, basically saying your lawyers and your trial didn't do a good job, and they did such a bad job that you should be given a new trial with competent lawyers. Basically, kind of how that rule works out. They reached out to my lawyer, who happened to be Holland Hoskins. She was fully in favor to say, yes, no, go ahead and file it. I'll testify that I was not the best for him and everything else. But that led to her, reaching out to me, and the full expressing of having her help out, and for which I was fully willing and grateful that she would even remember and want to come back and help out. And that really started, was where all of the real momentum started for me to come home.
Yeah, and then what was really touching that I saw also as well, which I talk a little bit more about the your old principal that stepped up, and also I would like for you to add your aptitude. You had mentioned to me that you were tested when you were in school, and I think this goes back to your principal stepping up. That you by far are a very capable and intellectual person who again fell into some unfortunate circumstances, and I don't think your mind was allowed to flourish in proper settings. So could you talk a little bit more about the principal that stepped up on your behalf?
So the principal in my elementary school for the entire time I was there went on to become, and is still currently, a sitting senator in the state of Maryland. Her name is Joanne Benson. Um, Once the Supreme Court ruling came down, we had lawyers in place. The lawyers started reaching back to Maryland to, talk to people who had known me, just to get a feel for who I was. And they were put in touch with Joanne Benson. And as soon as she found out what my scenario was, because we had lost touch with her, me going to Colorado, her going into politics. But once she found out what the circumstances and where I was, the moment their session ended that April, I remember, she was on a plane out to see me. She attended every single hearing, which is not something that I could say about family members, supporters, or anybody else. She attended every single hearing I had from that point forward. She testified in front of the Colorado Senate, where they were pushing to change the laws out there as it came to sentencing juveniles, not just myself, but every other person that might have been a juvenile. And she became really my champion. She became the person who would work, would fight. It wasn't just a person saying, hey, I believe in Curtis Brooks, I support Curtis Brooks. She was there. She was going out and getting flyers and petitions signed, and, doing things like that. What you're referring to before is something that she brought up more recently that I didn't really know about. And it was during my time in elementary school. I think she said about the fourth grade, they had me tested for what they call TAG, which is talented and gifted. She apparently still has the record somewhere that she said she could find. But what she told me was, after the test, they presented the information to my grandmother, and my grandmother refused to sign paperwork, which would have moved me into I guess, that program or whatever that program looked like for accelerated learning.
Do you think if you were moved in that program, there would have been a significant butterfly effect
I
that
don't
would
know.
have pivoted your life?
I had such deep-seated issues at that time, and most of it revolved around family.
Hmm.
Growing up with a mother that was crack addicted and in and out of our lives, growing up with a father who really just did not care. I would see him periodically, and it was almost like he was forced to do those. He wouldn't, do them on his own. He had to be called and told, "Hey, come get your son and spend some time with him," and then I would see him. So, and the rest of my family structure really isn't good. I won't go into detail about that because I don't want people jumping on here trying to do back and forth about
Right.
my family trying to defend themselves. It's just not good. So I had those issues where I definitely felt like from a very young age I was on my own. I was alone. Adopted the mantles of I have to be tough, show no fear. I'm on. I got to look out for myself. So I didn't come from the strong upbringing, which really gives you the backbone to launch into something like that. To say, I'm going to fully give myself to this program and try to push my education with the support of family and everyone else behind me who's going to encourage me when it gets difficult or hard to keep going and overcome any obstacles. But I don't know that it wouldn't have either. I can say once I started really tantalizing my intellect in prison and starting to learn and getting out of fantasy books and things like that and getting into nonfiction and philosophy, I had a brain that just craved more. No matter how much I learned, no matter how much I studied, I wanted to learn more. And I drove myself hard on that.
Yeah, and let's expand just slightly on the context of you having the experience, whether it was true or not. It was very real for you, and I think it was both a real experience and a truth that you didn't have the support around you. I think many people in society were very quick to judge and say that's a bad person, and I'm sure for a lot of people, Curtis, you were, and maybe some today, Carrie, are a bad person. Yet that principle that knew that young child knew enough to know this is not a bad person. This is a gifted child who is in a circumstance that doesn't have the proper support in his life. And she made a very big stand for you. My question is now, would you say that while being in what we say the proper term, were you in jail? So you were never actually in a prison? Was it in a jail you were in?
No, I was in prison.
Okay.
The distinction I was making is once you're in jail while you're in court. Once you're sentenced, they send you to kind of a in between facility where they make the discretion of whether or not you go to the highest level facility or you go to a lower level, lower custody facility. So I was only there for a few weeks before I was sent to prison, and they sent
Okay.
me to the highest level prison.
Okay. Highest level prison, 17 years old, trigger you didn't pull. Now, would you say that in prison, and I'm not asking you to advocate for everyone, I'm not asking you to advocate for certain individuals. I'm asking that, would you say that there were others that you would propose fell under that same aspect of not necessarily being a quote unquote bad person? They also had similarities about their backing where they didn't have the support around them either, or they come from homes where parental guidance was missing, or there was turmoil around them. Would you say that was a common thing? And I'm assuming that you got to know some people while you were there.
I wouldn't say anything is common.
Okay.
What I tell people is in prison, you meet all kinds. The people that you can walk out your house and go meet today are the people that you meet in prison. The different circumstances are you have some people who have acted on impulses. You have some very bad people in there who have bad thoughts and they don't hesitate to act on them because they've given themselves the identity, ego, whatever you want to call it, of being the tough guy, and nothing comes before making sure I put that out there. You have some people that are mentally just out there that don't see anything wrong with going out and killing someone or harming someone or maiming someone. I I don't put all of the caveats of the background, the lack of parents. That's a very big one. It is. Lack of a stable environment, because you can go find any number of people who grew up in stable environments. You can find people who were sheltered their entire lives. And because of the absolute sheltering, the smothering that they've received, it set them down a different path because now they didn't learn, consequences of right and wrong. They were always protected from a consequence or something like that, which is a lot of what you see in society today. Is you remove consequence, and then people starting off as kids going into adults don't understand that for action there is a consequence, for action there is no consequence, so therefore there is no action in which not to engage. um, but as I was saying, you meet all kinds. I have met people that you would look at and say, no chance they should ever be let out. I don't care how much college they take. I don't care how many programs they take. They should never be out of prison. And there are some people that you can literally look them in their eyes, and the look that you get from their eyes, like they say, eyes are the windows to the soul. There are some people that you see their soul, and they should never be out of prison. There are some people that grew up in bad circumstances. A lot of kids grow up without families, wind up in gangs. Gangs wind up leading to bad scenarios. There are some people that were just put in a situation where, in that moment, whether you call it the heat of passion or whatever, they just didn't make the right decision. Have taken the time to reflect on that, realize the error of not, and the severity of not making the right decision, and have chosen to take their different paths. So it is very easy for people to try to lump somebody in and say, you went to prison for this crime, you're a bad person. Um, you saved a baby bird that fell out of the nest from getting hit by a truck, you're a good person. But there is so much more to that. There is so much more to the individual, who that person might be, the true essence of who they are that might not necessarily shine at that moment. Because that same person that might have saved that bird might be doing something in the dark of hours that you don't want to know about. So I would just say the answer to that is there are all kinds in prison. Whatever you think that you want to find, you will find it there.
Yeah, I appreciate that insight. And what I got from that is there's a diversity. There's a full spectrum. You have, and I won't, just for sake of this conversation, I'll use you as a base. As you got the 17-year-old kid who just happened to be at a certain place at a certain time. And then you have the individual where you look into their eyes and there's an agreement that this person just doesn't belong out in society, wouldn't function well, is not able to disassociate from those very negative thoughts, and just has an impulse where they're going to act on them. And that's somebody where you don't want to see with the rest of the crowd. And so, and then with in between that, there's a spectrum of people. And as you said, every story is different, and there's a diversity there. That's what I got from what you shared. Would that be accurate?
Yes, there's
Awesome.
such a diversity. Every person that has killed someone, and I hate to use that as an example, but I'm thinking of a particular person. Every person that has killed someone hasn't killed this person for the same reason. And the reason that I say it like that is there's a guy that I knew in prison that I personally met, got to talk to, and everything else, and who revealed his story, and that he was from California. A family friend, he came to find out, had molested his daughter. The police didn't arrest him. The guy fled. He wound up tracking him down to the state of Colorado, and when he found him, he shot and killed him. That's a scenario where a lot of people will look at it and you will get a lot of different reactions. A lot of people will say he's just a flat murderer, he's a terrible person. A lot of people will say, I don't necessarily blame him for what he did. And that's
Yeah.
that's what I mean by you can't just paint people with a broad stroke. There is so much more to the person, to the motivation, than just saying you did this, you're a bad person.
Yeah, agreed. Great. And so let's circle back now to you and your story. So now here you are, you have people starting to advocate for you. Your old elementary school principal now is making a stand and doesn't even skip a beat, which says more than the rest of the support that you have around you, which is fantastic. So now, how does this now start to unfold? How does the rest of the process go, even leading up to, them telling your story on A&E?
I don't really think, aside from personally inside, like the hope that it created, and everything else, I don't really think that it created this paradigm shift. I was already a person who was focused on, and I can't tell you why. People will always say, "How did you hold on to hope?" I don't really know that it was hope as much as stubbornness to say that I'm not going to die in prison. I was literally trying to prepare myself for the day that I went home. I wanted to be educated. I used to sit down and literally a form of education I would do about myself is asking people who were recently from the streets, older guys who had lived, had families, had kids, held jobs, everything else, and like pick their brains about life because I wasn't able to live it. I wasn't able to be out here paying bills. I wasn't out here worrying about car insurance and everything else. So I would ask people from different parts, and they would come from different states and everything else, and I would pick their brains about life, about relationships, about just being out living. And it was all so that I could prepare myself. So while this process is going, I'm still doing the same things I was already doing. I'm now just doing it, I guess, at an accelerated state to say, well, I might not have the time that I had before, and I need to make sure I'm ready. So with all of the fighting, a person that hasn't been mentioned yet is one of my jurors, Bruce, who he came and asked to visit me, and we sat down and talked. And after visiting, he showed up and he testified at the bill hearings for the Senate. He came to every single one of my hearings, and he even showed up to my wedding. Has been one of my biggest advocates since that time, and is a person that I actually consider a friend. And people laugh about that because this is one of the people who decided to send me to prison. But I don't blame him for that. Again, I blame me for putting myself in that position. If I hadn't, he would have never been able to send me to prison.
Well, I'd like to make a comment on that, and I'm happy you brought that up because one of the things that I saw in this special that, again, coming from a place of mindfulness was concerning was the response from the district attorney and how his focus was on how this reversal would take away the hard work of the jurors, never mind the 17-year-old life. And the reason why I bring that up is not to put the spotlight on him. Let's go back to that one juror. It was, I think it was him in the video, and there was one other one, and I'm sure it's not just these two, that also said that there was information withheld. And had they actually gotten that information, there have been multiple jurors that said they could not have convicted you for that crime and would not have. So, I can see that friendship and nothing odd from it because, yes, they voted and agreed to put you in prison with the information they had. So take that for what it's worth. Now, you're going through this process. How long did the process take? From the moment you got notified, hey, this is a possibility, to the moment you walked out of that prison, what was the time frame of that?
I said, I believe the Miller ruling came down in 2013. It wasn't until 2019 that I actually walked out.
Wow, 6 years. 6 years. And as you're shooting this special, I'll bring it up because I think it comes up, and you and I even had a little talk about it. There's this little smirk, right? That got.
I won't smirk now. I don't want to get.
It's a different smirk now, right? But there was a little smirk there, and it caused, I'm sure, reactions from people. And I think a lot of people have an ignorance of that setting, what's going on, the fact that your whole circumstance and your whole experience. And you don't have to. I bring it up because it comes up. Would you like to comment on it and where that came from or what it meant, or because there's a little.
I will go ahead and I will explain the smirk for anyone who thought that there was anything negative behind it. In agreeing to do with the A&E episode, we didn't really know what the angle of A&E was. Like, we didn't get the full rundown of, hey, we're doing all of these stories and this is what we're focused on. This is what we're going to present. It was literally A&E is looking to do stories on juveniles. Are you interested in doing it? So then we had personal conversations, but I also had, my internal thoughts about what's the agenda. What are they after? Are they going to come in and really try to tell the story and give me what I was looking for, which was a chance to really broadcast my story? Because in Colorado, I would see many people wind up in the papers. They were winding up on the news. They were doing radio shows. And these were guys that had shot somebody in a gang drive-by, guys who had killed their parents. And I'm looking and seeing the cases that are being presented for the public are actual killers. Why not take somebody that hadn't actually killed somebody and present it? So that was my focus. My agenda in this was to get the story out. I don't know what their agenda is. So while I'm being questioned, I'm really paying attention to not what they ask, but what's the motivation behind the question? What are they really trying to get at? Because it's not always just the answer. They have an agenda, a focus for why they're asking the question. So the question came up, and we were actually talking off camera a bit about basically what's deserved. And I told them, like, I don't believe anybody really deserves anything. You can put yourself in a position, you can work and everything else to where you can feel like you've earned it. When you talk about deserve, for me, that's a hard one. So then they asked me the question, and I believe verbatim, it was, what do you feel like you deserve? I smirked because to me, it was that aha moment. This is the question where you're trying to catch me, because I see that as a question that they can ask you 100 times and you can answer it wrong 99. So that was, maybe there was a little bit of, I don't want to say smugness, but of, oh, you think you got me, but I'm smarter than this. I'm already on to you and I've been waiting for this. So that's where that smirk came from. It was, you think you got me on this one, but no, I'm not going to fall into this trap and look like one of these guys that's sitting there talking about, I deserve this and I was 15, so I don't deserve anything.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, appreciate it. And so they shoot the special, you go through, 6 years go by, and you get let out. Let's talk to this point. You had mentioned to me, because when I watched the video, I got emotional. I teared up with that phone call when they were going through the governor's. Do you remember what that was called again? I forget what they call these.
The clemency orders.
Yes, they were going through the clemency orders, and then they're looking for you. And in my head, my tech is like, why don't they just hit Control F and they can just find his? That's neither here or there. Okay, they find your name, and you get let out. Now, I felt that heartfelt. You happened to pop my bubble there because you had already actually known, and they had you redo the phone call. Now, my question is, authentically, not what they showed. What was it like, Curtis, when it was the first time for you, when you actually got that experience that it was going to happen?
So the dirty secret that I'm letting out, and it might upset some people. I don't know. A&E might get mad. My lawyers might get mad. I don't know. Is we shot the whole conversation with me, we got your order, so you're getting out and everything else on a Friday. I found out on Tuesday through a phone call with the governor's office that they had decided to take the chance on me and allow me to have a second chance in society. So that for me, when I found out, was kind of I remember sitting at the phone for a minute after I hung up and just kind of staring off into space. And then I just went to my room and really just started like playing out okay, I'm going to get this chance. What do I want to do? So then my mind goes to my release date and what am I going to do? And what do I want to do first? And what's my focus? And it was very exciting, but I'm also I'm not the most excitable person because I always remember that, the universe seems to balance itself. And for, all the great things that happen, there tend to be like a negative thing that'll happen to kind of counterbalance your universe. A lot of people will say that that was a positive for the negative. I don't know, but I'm always the person that says that, just because everything looks great right now doesn't mean that it's going to stay that way. So I need to get to the finish line and know that the race is over before I start celebrating.
Well, in that analogy there, I think the race is over when we're in the coffin or in the ground or in the kiln, or you can make yourself a tree now. So
No,
uh,
I just look at it in a scenario of football players. How many times have you watched a football game? And I'm saying that 'cause Super Bowl's today,
yeah,
and
yeah.
people are 15 yards ahead of everybody, and they start celebrating, and then they drop the football.
Those are some of the best highlights.
So yeah, I'm definitely a person. I won't ever drop that football. It has to be in the end zone, and I got to be sitting on the bench before I put the ball down.
Makes perfect sense. It's yeah, makes perfect sense. I love it, man. So now we're at the point where you get the call. You're planning out what you're going to release date, and you're out. Do you want to unpack more of what that feeling was like, not getting the call, stepping out, having that day, that first day? I mean, I don't know if this is even a question now. People may say, well, what did you eat first? Or, what was the first thing you did? What would you like to share that is notable?
I think my reaction is different than what a lot of people expected or would expect. As the day came, like I didn't feel like that excitement in the pit of your stomach, like I expected I would. It was almost like a firmness of, all right, now it's time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I felt when I go through the process of them releasing me and open the door and let me out. It was like, all right, now it's time. I've been preparing myself for this. I've been setting my mind on the outside of this fence for the entire time I was in there. That's how I avoided getting caught up in the minutia that exists in there. I didn't make that my world. My world was out here, and this is what I was preparing to get back to. And I take a thing that I carry with me that is very real, and it was said in a interview I did with the Denver Post after I got out. They asked me what my biggest fear was, and for me, it's complacency. To me, I don't ever want to be a person that feels like, all right, I've accomplished it, because in that, you kind of just let down, and that drive and that motivation is gone. I'm a person that I tell myself I want to run 100 yards. And once I get to that 50-yard line, I move my goal out farther.
Hmm.
So, and people say that that's a hard way to live and that you put too much stress on yourself and everything else. But that's how I stay motivated. That's how I stay running, because the only way for me to get to the end, even though I know I'm not going to get there, is to keep running. So walking out those doors, it was, all right, my goal had been to prep myself for when I get to the point of walking out these gates. But before I walk out the gates, now my goal is gone. I've moved it past that. Now for me, my focus really walking out those doors is on all of the people that supported me, all of the people that looked past my charge, my circumstances, my dumbass decisions that I made as a kid, and said, we believe in you. And now my motivation is walking out these doors. I can never let them down, ever, because then I make them fools. My motivation is also to walk out those doors, and for everyone who believes that I'm just this corrupt person and I'm going to get out and I'm going to do what I did to that family to someone else and cause them pain, and to the family themselves who believe that, hey, if you let this guy out, he's just going to do it again. I have to live a life that shows that, one, I am not what people believe I am, but two, I don't devalue the situation that I went through. Because I believe if I came out here and was just acting a fool, went back to running the streets like I did when I was 15, being in dumb situations and everything else, I hadn't learned anything. And if I didn't learn anything from that situation, then everything that the price that was paid that night for the victim of that crime, for Christopher Ramos, was for absolutely nothing. For absolutely nothing. And to me, that would be the biggest disrespect and disregard of a person's life that you could ever do. And I will never do that.
Since I've met you in our talks, your authenticity and genuineness has been very impressive. And your lack of defense has been very impressive. As we're now at the conclusion, and your goal now is set further, what would you like to share that you would want people to know? And I'm not going to direct the question, just an open-ended. What is it that you would like to close on?
What I would like to close on is really a concept. And it's an opposite concept of what so many people hold on to in society. And that is that people aren't their shortcomings. People aren't their mistakes. I'm looking to be, since I've been out, I've been more motivated to be active. I've worked for a nonprofit helping out with elementary schools that were 3 of the most underperforming in the state of Maryland. Moving to the state of New York, I've helped out with nonprofits here and giving away gifts for Christmas. Being part of reaching those who so many people ignore, reaching people who aren't reached or reached out to help. In the same way that you take a person, I'll partly take an analogy that I've used before. There are a lot of people in this world that can go open up a box, mix the batter together, throw it in the stove, and they can bake a cake. Just because you bake a cake don't make you a chef. Just because you make a mistake doesn't make you a villain, and it doesn't make you a terrible person. People can learn, people can grow. And if it takes me to advocate, it takes me to be the example for people to learn and to understand that a person can make a mistake and grow and learn from it, for them to turn around and look at the next person who made a mistake and say, hey, there's a chance that he can learn, he or she can grow from it and become a better person, then I accept that mantle and I accept the burden that comes with it. All the scrutiny, all the eyeballs, everything else that comes with it, I accept it.
Yeah, that's great, man. That's great. We'll end there. So, scene. Awesome, my friend. Awesome. So I'll run in a little bit.